and welcome to the American Scouser podcast. Monday night, we are back in action on a Memorial Day, and all three of us are here. This is me, Timuchin, as always, hosting here from beautiful weathered Chicago. It doesn't get any better than this. Yesterday, a little bit of rain, but heck, can't complain. So it's been a great weekend overall. Everybody was home, which is rare these times, with Jasmine being in Milwaukee and Layla normally in college and stuff like that. But all good, back to normalcy a little bit. Speaking of normalcy, Bickler is with us. Bickler, what's happening? Bickler is frozen in time.
That is a perfect freeze. It was like,
yeah, just Memorial Day, so I guess I'm buffering and day drinking with Shelton already. So yes, happy Memorial Day, the official celebration in America where we day drink and argue about politics.
Speaking of Shelton, yeah, he's even joined the century. I have not seen it in action yet, actually, but no spoilers to see if there's going to be any lag. And Gally's with that. Gally, what's happening?
Not too much. Just getting all that shit rain you had yesterday. It was a dismal day here in New England of pouring, pissing rain. So we must have got the weather you had yesterday, I think.
Yeah, it was literally like all day almost, it felt like, but afterwards. Shelton says, glad you got my internet to Bickler. That was an awesome pause. That would be a good clip because it's the most sassiest pose you could ever give, I think, being frozen. So this is probably how the normal human beings live, Bickler, with no soccer and stuff like that on a weekend. It just felt odd. Are you kind of enjoying the time off, if you will, or...
I always get a little bit of fatigue this time of year. I think where I struggle as a sports fan is when we get through the NBA finals and like we're just stuck with baseball. Like that's where because then it's literally baseball and summer transfer rumors, which we all know how you feel about that, Tim. So it's rough sledding for a couple months here.
The Euros are here, man. Hang in there. We got 3 weeks before the Euros start.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having that for sure. Even though I hate international football, it's a nice break.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Turkey is in it, so that'll be something to get depressed over. So I won't miss that. And yeah, I mean, normally, you just sit down and watch and just enjoy the game itself, and look at some players, do your own, virtual scouting and stuff like that. But yeah, when Turkey is involved, it's just a whole different level of misery. Gally, how about you? Enjoying the time off, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that you get to take a little break and a little breather is nice. Obviously, there were a couple matches this weekend. Obviously, I watched a little bit of the FA Cup final. I did watch before we did our season recap award show yesterday. I did watch a little bit of the first half of that playoff promotion match for the championship. So there's a little bit of football on, but I did look this morning, just like, is there anything on today? And I was like, ooh. We're talking second division Brazil. Like we are going deep.
Same thing like half an hour ago. I'm like, whoa, nothing.
Yeah, nothing. We still got the Europa Conference League, I guess, on Wednesday. For all those supporters of Fiorentina out there and Olympiacos, and then we got what else? So we got the Champions League final next weekend, which who knows what kind of match that'll be. I have a feeling it will be more like the way we thought the FA Cup was supposed to go. And the side that's really favored will probably put I don't expect that one to be a big upset myself. So, I think football's pretty much done until the internationals start in a few weeks.
Yeah, and then that's the thing, right? Like I'm seeing it more and more now. I know some leagues just ended basically yesterday, so they still had games. So some of these guys still have like a week or so to report, but some national teams are already reporting and stuff. Like we talked about this last week, Bickler, and we even said, hey, we wouldn't be surprised to hear some like news and stuff like that. Obviously, 'tis the season. There's a lot of rumors going out there. Does the fact that all these camps starting means that it's not going to happen? Because I know, for example, like I say, as somebody from Turkey, if a Turkish player in camp is like negotiating with like freaking AC Milan on their contract and stuff, it's going to irk everybody and be like, you know what, focus on task on hand. You can do your freaking contract afterwards. So I would think most players would kind of shy away from that, even though I know they're not at the table signing papers, just the fact that their mind is occupied with that would irk the country. So are we running too late, or basically we will be only going after players not going to the Euros?
I mean, I think at this point, I think what's going to happen is I think you're not going to see an announcement until after Euros for some of these players. But I think there'll be a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and I still think business happens regardless. I just think the announcement will come till after. So yeah, I think we're running up against it. Would it surprise me if we sneak one in here? Probably not. But like I think for the most part, like most of this action is going to happen, especially the players we've been linked with. What I've been reading is like those announcements are going to come after Euros now at this point. So
is that in some ways a negative where you can get priced out a little bit, Gally? Because, let's say you have a player in mind, he's like 25, 30 right now, and before you know it, even if his release clause stays the same, let's say he has a release clause and it's the same, his wages and his demands his suitors are going to be more. So is it kind of a risky business to leave it after the Euros?
I mean, I think it can be, but I mean, what business can you do? You can't really sign a player till July 1st anyways. You can negotiate. But these clubs that are selling clubs, they know that is a capability as well. But they can also go there and put in a stinker and decrease their value. If you're a up-and-coming player who maybe hasn't proven it yet on the big stage, but had a monster season in Portugal or a monster season in the Dutch league, well, maybe you are not as highly sought after when you're put up against top level talent at the European level and you kind of lay an egg, especially if you're in like a defensive midfield position or a defender where they can actually quantify the type of an attacker you're going against. I always think an attacking player, it's always difficult to be like, he had a terrible tournament. And then you're like,
yeah,
he plays for the third worst offensive team in all of Europe. He just plays for Iceland. He didn't have a bad tournament. He's Icelandic. Like it never seems fair to me when we rate players like that, except for when they're English, because then we should just drive that damn price down because they're all overpriced as it is.
They're all overpriced. Yeah, it's like the English tax. But I mean, here's the thing. If you're a selling club in some ways, Bickler, in most cases, you have a lot more to gain than to lose by having a player out there. Because if you're interested, you're interested. But if he does well, now more people are interested.
Well, yeah, the longer the auction's open, the more bids you're going to get, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the general philosophy there. We keep it open until the last possible moment. So absolutely, it makes sense for a lot of these clubs to go into this tournament and see what happens. And for a lot of these guys, like, I think if you go in and have a good tournament, right, you could double, triple your price at most in the most extreme scenarios. And if you have a stinker, maybe you knock 10 million off, right? So, like, I think it definitely benefits more to stick in there and see if they have a great tournament. But that's how you end up with Amrabat.
But I'm assuming you kind of gave the answer already, Gally, but you probably don't put a lot of stock in it then to see, let's say if I tell you we're interested in this player, like Orkun Kökçü, which I don't know if I'm sold about, for example, from Turkey was rumored because he used to play for Feyenoord and then he went to Benfica and has had some problems over there, but still has played. More like a midfielder / attacking midfielder, and that was the drama. He wanted to play more attacking, blah blah blah. But will you look at a player in the Euros and judge them based on what they do there, or does that not really matter to you?
I put more stock in how they play for their club the last 18 months than I do and like the trajectory of their career. I think again we've talked about how club football is day to day. And you're working with the manager, the physios, the teammates. So I put more stock in the body of work when it comes to the club than I do the individual countries. And I think, I'll give you an example, right? The United States. If you look at some of our players, if you watch Antoine Robinson over the last 18 months at Fulham, a decent club would say there's a player there we could play in our system and he could attack, he can create, he has good underlying numbers. You watch that guy play left back for the United States of America and you'd be like, wow, someone taught that kid to kick it to the corner and run. Like it's just completely different, but that's the tactics and it's the players around him. So, and I think there's other players we've talked about in the past, we all love to make fun of Olivier Giroud's hair, right? But if you watch Olivier Giroud at 172 right now playing in MLS, he still looks like the Olivier Giroud who could score some goals, but it's kind of old.
Is he here already playing?
Yeah, he's at the
LA, right?
not LA Galaxy, the other one.
LAFC. Right?
LAFC, yeah. But,
Oh,
I just use him as an example because when he would go, even at the end, when he was struggling with Chelsea, wasn't getting huge minutes with AC Milan, he'd go away with France and he would start over Benzema. Because for that setup, he was their best striker. And I just think sometimes international football is like fool's gold, which is why everyone wants to buy that kid. Everyone wants to buy the kid from Portugal every time they watch him play after he plays for Renato Sanchez. Every 4 years, Renato Sanchez gets a big transfer because there's an international tournament and he looks a world beater. Then he goes to a big club and they're like, oh, shit, we got that kid from the French league that can't play.
And I think you as a teammate and your consistency is a bigger issue at the club level than a Euro. You can kind of go be in a good system, get in a good groove, and have your fun. And honestly, I do think players at times are a bit more relaxed as well when they go to these tournaments, as opposed to like being in a title race that they just got out of and stuff like that. There's that like little relief of that sort. And I think it helps them play, but that doesn't always translate to club football. But having said that, I know we're going to be watching and looking at certain players and be like, oh man, he'd be a shoe-in and stuff like that. So you guys were discussing this earlier on the Discord channel. So let me ask you this, Gally. As we go grocery shopping over here for players over the summer, in terms of who's going to come in, who's going to go out, how much of that, if you made a pie so we can eat it over here, how much of a slice do you think Slot is getting there in terms of having a say?
I think it's less than a slot. It's a lot more like a sliver. We're gonna have some bad puns.
Oh God, yeah.
Just letting you know, the dad joke of non-dads is back. No, I definitely think that. I think it's a sliver. I don't think he gets much say. I said it earlier. I could see it being a world of like, hey, we're thinking about these 5 guys. Any of them jump out at you as someone you wouldn't want on your side or you don't think their skills work out. He's going to have input on the list. But I truly believe that Edwards and his operations team are going to do all the negotiating and they're going to have the final say on the players coming in. But more importantly, I think Slot's going to get even less say on the players going out. And I think that's where Edwards really made his bones the first time. And I think that's where Edwards and Klopp had the biggest problems. Everyone cites the Milner contract and the Henderson contract. And I don't think Edwards liked those. But I think Klopp had issues with some of the players that Edwards sold at times. And I think Klopp also had issues with the fact that Edwards wanted to sell players. Probably like Genie and even Emre Can at times, and Klopp probably overruled him and kind of went above him. And I think at times Mike Gordon stepped in, and I think that's what we're not going to see anymore. I think Slot's going to have a little say, but it's going to be a lot more like the say guys get it like Crystal Palace and Brighton. But those clubs run pretty well too when they have good football people in charge, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think it's because of the decision makers that we have faith in. We're mostly okay with it. Normally, I think it would be more about, no, we want the manager to have say and stuff like that. I mean, we were talking about a little bit about this with Mateusz this morning too, Bickler. I mean, you would think Slot is probably providing a profile overall, right? Like, these are the things I'm looking for. And then he's probably offered some names that he might veto or approve and stuff like that. But obviously doesn't have any part of the negotiations. And if I'm assuming if the price gets over a certain points, they're like, well, I guess we're going with plan B because we're not spending 50 on that dude kind of a deal.
Yeah, I do think he's going to get a say on incoming. I do think that they're going to value his opinion in terms of obviously there's a player profile in terms of age, like contract, what it costs. And I think we're smart enough to know the logistics of what we're getting tactically in a manager, considering the fact that the managerial shortlist had a lot to do with the tactics side of it. So I think we know kind of what we want, but I do think that they are going to default to him and be like, hey, based on your system, like on this list, are there any guys that particularly you really like jump out at you as somebody that's like a high caliber player that could be a game changer in the system? Like, I think they will value that opinion. I agree with Gally, where I think that he's not going to have any say as on extensions. And I think that's the big thing. I think that Edwards probably made that really clear when he came in, this is how it's going to run. This is what I'm going to do. And I think, I think the days of extending players to have them in as locker room influences when they don't have a whole lot of like financial value anymore, it's probably going to be over. Like, I think that this team is going to look for a lot of leadership. I think it's going to blend some veteran leadership in, but I think it's not going to continue to extend players. I think the criticism of Klopp is that he tended to be overly loyal to a core group of players at times. And I think a lot of that had to do with like those extensions on older players, even players like Bobby Firmino, you know what I mean, who we loved and wanted to see there forever. I think if you gave Edwards a truth serum, I think a lot of those players would have gone 2 or 3 windows prior to when they actually went.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, Gali. I'm assuming, especially the outgoings, was part of the conversation you would think during the interview process. Like, as they're discussing the future and which direction they want to go, that's one of the biggest things they're going to discuss. And while they might not know price and stuff, I would think, okay, let's say, I know, Van Dijk. They're going to be like, hey, we want to keep him, but, within these parameters, if it doesn't happen, Van Dijk might not happen. Same thing for Mo. And I feel like Trent is the most likely to get like a city discount too, in terms of, like being, the Scots on our team and stuff like that, and growing from the youth academy and everything. But, you said it might be a sliver. Do you think because he's almost going to have to bring his own system along, that sliver might get thicker because he's going to say, this is the kind of guy I need? Or has he already been given parameters? Hey, man, you think you can take the squad and play in your system? Yes or no?
Well, I'm pretty sure that a big part of the interview process was, what do you think of, everyone always talks about how when these coaches go in, and I've heard it for like NFL jobs, right? They used to go in with like these big 3-rin binders, and they'd come in and they'd like lay out their offense, and this is what I do. And I remember one time I heard how Mike Tomlin got the job for the Steelers, and like he wasn't even like it was the Rooney Rule. He only got interviewed because they had to interview a black guy. They had 2 white guys on the roster they thought they were going to hire, and then he blew them away. And when he came in, he didn't talk at all about what he was going to do. He talked about every one of their players right now on the Steelers and how he'd make them better than Bill Cowher had them for the last 30 years. And like the Rooneys were blown away because he cared so much about what they had there. And I feel like from what I've seen of Slot, I think Slot has already come in. And they probably know the 2 or 3 players Slot believes he can't live without, and the 2 or 3 players he thinks he can improve. And then I think they know the 1 or 2 spots he's missing. And I do think Edwards will go out and fill those spots. But I'm very confident that they will do that for him, because they know they need those pieces. And I think we know it. A center back, a DM, and potentially a right-sided attacker. I mean, we've been saying the same thing for 3 windows, and then we buy 5 different players that don't fit any of those needs. So it's going to be interesting. Before the outgoings happen, I don't think we really know what we need other than a quality number 6, a depth at center back, and coverage, if not a replacement at right wing. And let's be honest, the $1 million elephant in the room, the big question is what's going to happen with Mo, because what happens with Mo is what I believe is the biggest domino effect for this summer. I know it sounds trivial to say, oh, you sell your best player, it would be a big deal. But I think that might change the sliver, to be honest, because if he has to replace Mo in this offense, he'll probably get a big say on what that piece is, unless he believes that piece is already here in Gakpo or Darwin or someone else that you're going to build it around.
I guess what the thing with Mo leaving would be more about what the budget would be like, right, Bickler, in terms of like what you have. So maybe, we talk about parameters, like you were talking about, like age and contract and stuff like that. Well, if you are actually moving away from Mo and not extending it and, like kind of cashing in when you can, that affects the parameters, doesn't it? In terms of the budget you can spend, and maybe it opens it up to the next tier of players that you might be able to go after for a number 6 or a center back or whatever.
I think when we talk about like budgets and funds and stuff, we have a tendency to limit that and look at it within a window. Like we're playing that money within a window. And we don't think about like what amortization looks like, and the fact that really, I don't think that Michael Edwards looks at it like that. I don't think he looks at it as like we have a budget for this year. I think he looks at it as like we have a 4 to 5 year budget that we need to hit target like milestones in terms of what he's looking to do. So I think what happens, like I think regardless of whether Mo goes or comes, I think we spend what Edwards thinks this side needs regardless of what happens. And does that change if Mo leaves? Certainly, but I don't think it changes what he spends. Like other than the fact that like if he thinks that there's a replacement piece for Mo that I think works and it's $35 million versus a replacement piece that he thinks that works that's $85 million, I don't think that necessarily like is dictated by the fact that it's happening in this window, if that makes sense. I think that he's going to go in and he's going to make the move that he thinks benefits this team in the long run. Because like, let's face it, if Edwards needs to go and spend 165 in one window, I don't think because he thinks the team needs it. I don't think he goes, well, we can spend 80 this window and we'll get the next in the next half window or next summer. I think he spends it now. And I think he thinks, well, we'll look at our pieces and we'll sell these assets off on the back end and make up for it over the next 3 or 4 windows, right? Because that's traditionally what he's done.
But in terms of having that spot open, isn't it a big deal? I mean, you talk about like an 80 million player, for example, right? We're not going an 80 million player or I guess maybe I should rephrase it. I don't know if the 80 million player is coming here to sit behind Mo. So doesn't that kind of, you know what I mean? Like,
well, sure. Yeah. I mean, that's under the operating assumption that he's gone and we're replacing it. Right.
Okay.
I think, and I think that even affects the third, like, I mean, I think that affects everything though. Like in most days, like, are we in for a Johan, like the kid from PSV? I don't know that, like, are we in for a guy that can leave for 35 million and wants Champions League football if Mo's in front of him? I don't know that we are, right? Like, so I think that affects anything. I just don't think it affects the money. Like, I think like that we'll spend what we want regardless of whether Mo goes or comes. Obviously, if Mo goes, I don't think that we're pigeonholed into a $35 million player necessarily is what I guess I'm saying.
And I know the assumption is obviously since we went after Caicedo and we're about to spend, like 80 or 100 or whatever the heck it was at the time, the assumption is like, oh, the money is there to be spent. But that was before Edwards came. I think the money is there to be spent, Kelly, as long as they feel the value is there to be spent on.
Yeah, I think Caicedo fit the right profile, though. He was a Premier League proven player under the age of 23, reaching the height of his prime, who people were excited to see play with a better team. We can all clown how Caicedo looked for the first 30 matches for Chelsea, but what we shouldn't laugh at is as soon as Enzo Fernandez got hurt and was out for the year, and if you look at the numbers for points per match that Chelsea got when Enzo Fernandez doesn't play since he signed for the club, they would literally be like second or third in the Premier League if he just didn't play for them. They're really, really good when he's not there. And part of it was Caicedo looked like the Caicedo at Brighton at the end of the season, which allowed those young attacking players for Chelsea to go forward. And the midfield was being marshaled by a destroyer. And I think Caicedo is going to end up being a success at Chelsea over the long haul because I think he's got the tools and we've seen it as a player and it looks like it's kind of coming together. Who knows, once he plays for 8 more managers. Yeah. But I can understand why we were trying to stump up the cash. And I still think we were all giddy that night we thought we signed him. And we were right to be giddy because it was going to be a wonderful transfer coup. And we were going to steal and take a march on a couple great teams that were around us. But I think the money's there. I don't know that they'll go out and stump that much money out now because I think in some ways they look at it as they have a couple players in their setup in the academy that they do believe could grow into that type of player. And I think Endo gives them a veteran presence to come from the bench and play a role and be one of the 2 anchoring sixes. And if you're going to play in a double pivot, I think you have pieces. So I don't think that they're going to go out and break the bank on a world-class center mid or defensive mid as much as everyone else does. I think they're going to go get a name we're not expecting. Like they're floating around the 2 names from Atalanta, the Ederson and Koopmeyers. Like I could see either one of them showing up for 16 to 25 million. Classic Edwards signing and being sold for 45 or 50 in 3 or 4 years. And even if they don't work, You'll still get 20 for him.
Yeah.
Which is what Edwards loves to do. So I don't think it's going to be massive names unless massive departures happen.
What do you think, Bickler? Do you see a big dollar signing this offseason, or because this is a new regime and we need pieces to settle down first to see exactly what we need, we kind of like put that in our back pocket for now, so that yes, this is we did that before. Like we were like, we need this piece, and we got Van Dijk and spent the money on him. Same thing with Alisson and stuff. Because it's a new regime, do we kind of like, does Edwards kind of sit and wait to see what that really piece is and the money is spent there, or all this, or we just kind of try to get more depth rather than put all eggs in one basket?
I could see something like a $60 million signing, like especially if there's somebody, especially with the lack of depth at CDM, right? If there's a shot at like an elite CDM coming in or an elite 6, I could see something like that. I could see some fairly significant money going into a younger center back too. I think this is so hard to talk about because I think there's so much unknown behind the scenes. And I think partially that's because Edwards has really tidied up a lot of the leaks that were happening. But I think essentially we have so many questions as to what really a lot of these players are valued at in terms of like their position on the team. Like, what is the true role of Darwin? Can we get Darwin and Gakpo in the same formation? What about Carvalho? What's the plan there? Like, there's so many of these players that like I think we don't know how the club feels about them, like, and how like I think specifically Edwards feels about them, and then in relation to Slot's system and like whether I just think there's a large conversation between Edwards and Slot on like 6 or 7 players. And I think that so much that happens this summer really hinges on the true evaluation behind the scenes of those 6 or 7 players, Mo being included. And so I really think that it's almost impossible to talk about. Like, we can speculate, but it's so hard to dictate and understand what's going to happen and project what's going to happen this window without knowing what's happening with those key players.
Yeah, that's what makes this offseason tricky, and the freaking Euro and everything makes it only trickier, it feels like, because we're not going to see them. And honestly, even in preseason, some of these guys are going to come in later and stuff like that. Now there's a talk of obviously Mo going to the Olympics and all that kind of stuff. But okay, next issue. You mentioned the academy earlier, Gally, so I want to give you this list of names. And we're going to look ahead to the future again. I'll take Kwanzaa off this list. Looks like an old farts amongst these names. But these are the academy players that played for the first team for the first time. They made their debut this season. In 5 years from now, how many of these or which one of these players will still be a Liverpool player on the first team? Kumas, who's 18. Dan's 18. McConnell is 19. Scanlon is 19, Nioni is 16, Chambers 19, and Musialowski, the Polish Messi, he is 20.
We took Bradley off the list too?
Bradley was not even, because I don't think it was his debut this year. I think maybe he might have squeaked
he made a he got one. I was waiting for the one name I could say for sure. I would say, I think the only one that I'm not far off. I was actually going to say 0 and agree with Nick. But in the effort of not agreeing with Nick, I'm going to say Nioni. I think Nioni showed a little bit of pomp and circumstance, shows the flair. He's gotten bigger and stronger. He was a steal from Leicester. It was an absolute coup to get him for the price they did, and Leicester was so upset he left. I think if Nioni has another year to year and a half and isn't forced into the first team setup, can get to 18 or 19 and keeps progressing the way he appears to, I could see him at this club at 21, 22, playing, the Arda Güler role at Real Madrid and not playing much, but being a real talent for the future. Like, that's what I could see Nioni and his role. Other than that, I know we love Dan's natural finishing and his little cheeky plays against United and the youth setup, but all those guys, they all smell like an overpriced Edwards sale. And that's what Edwards loves. He probably everyone thought Jurgen leaving was what brought Edwards back. Edwards saw all the dollar signs were just rolling like Looney Tunes in his head when he thought about how he could fleece Bournemouth for Dan's kid and he could sell him for like 42 million in 3 years.
Yeah, Shelton says Nioni needs to bulk up. Yeah, that's one thing I see because you see the quality of the player, and I feel
16.
like he's 16. You look at like the evolution of Trent's body from when we first saw him starting, where he's a little boy, literally playing, as opposed to like how much he's gotten stronger. If Nioni can get that step as well. Yeah, I mean, the kid looks special. Like how he is on the ball, he does look very special. His vision, his passing, is like skills on the ball and stuff like that. Yeah, Nick says they're all Ryan Brewsters. Do you agree, Bickler? 5 years from now, I don't know, we'll be around to see it. But if we are, which one of these guys are we going to see?
I mean, the historical percentage says that it's a really small chance that any of these guys break through, right? So I think it's weird when we're like, I think it's weird when they're all Brewsters. I'm like, Brewster was average. Like, that's what the statistics do. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think I do agree with Gally. The one that kind of sticks out to me is Nioni. I think Nioni is, I mean, aside from the statistical battle uphill to get through, like I think the one thing about him is that he's got Ben Doak in front of him. So I think that's going to be the one sort of obstacle for him is like how does he break through that ahead of Ben Doak? I look at that list and it's like it seems like a lot of those players are going to end up going Champions League or lower bottom table for big money. I don't see a ton of those guys that I lock in. But we sit here and do this, and one of them could be the next Trent, right, or the next Raheem Sterling. We just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I look at like Dance, for example, and I feel like, maybe like 3-4 years down the road, he could be the next Solanke or somebody like that. I mean, that's kind of like the player I see in him, to be honest with you. I mean, love watching the kid. That's a different story. I really think if Klopp stayed, I would say McConnell, because I really think anytime he talked about McConnell, he talked in a different kind of way. And I really think like it's kind of like fit him perfectly, like what Klopp wants from a player. But now that Klopp is gone, we don't know what even the formation and stuff is going to be to see if some of these guys fit even in there. And I guess that's like the bigger question, right? We always talk about Gally in terms of, the academy team mirroring the first team so you can kind of like progress through the levels and stuff. Do you expect like a huge turnover, or are we being an Arne Slot because we don't feel like there's going to be a huge turnover that's going to affect the youth team?
I think it's more the latter. I think Arne Slot's coming in because he was the right manager for the job. He wanted the job. But I do believe that we're making too much into the whole 4-2-3-1. He played a fluent 4-2-3-1 that at times morphed into a 4-3-3. He went back to a 4-3-3 at different times at Feyenoord over the last couple of years when things didn't work out. And that 4-3-3 was a high press, possession-based, attacking-minded philosophy. So yes, there's going to be a philosophical, tactical change. I think there's just going to be more tactical flexibility. I don't think it's going to look all that different. I just think the manager's going to be more flexible with making changes when the opponent dictates it, where we know Jurgen Klopp, whether it was to his strength or his detriment, was stuck in his own principles and believed it didn't matter whether we were playing Burnley or City. We were going to play our football, and if we did it well, we were going to win on that day. And I don't think Arne Slot is 100% that way. I think we might be getting caught up in the formation, but maybe that's just excitement because it's been 9 years since we saw anything else. It's like,
you know what it is? It's the fact that we predicted a 4-2-3-1 for the last 7 years. So that's what that is.
Right, and we just want to be right just once. Once.
I asked this, and I know John asked you guys the question I asked the Wednesday morning crew. And you guys talked about, what Slot's first thing should be or how he should approach it and stuff. But Bickler, you were not on either one. So let me ask you this. If you're on a Slot, I mean, we talk about, different formations and stuff like that. Do you think as a new manager coming in, do you want to, in this situation, if you're Arne, if you're coming into the situation, do you want to almost make a signature impact move? Or do you want to just go with the slight tweaks and it looks very similar to what we're seeing now? Do you make something significant that says the Arne era has started? or do you kind of like keep going with making minor tweaks that maybe like the most average fan might not even recognize?
So it's kind of a blend of the two. I'd make a signature tactical move. That's like a blueprint of what I want to do with the parts I already have. That makes sense. So I would be tweaking players, and because I personally feel like a lot of the parts that we have that have been sort of odd spare parts, or we haven't been able to figure out to do, actually work really well with what he does. Like we could play a double pivot with McAllister in it, and McAllister could still play in an advanced role when we are in possession. Darwin could be playing on the left and be basically an off the shoulder striker, which is what he likes to do in that system. I think the one thing that we would have to figure out is, what does this left back situation look like? I mean, in his tactics, the left back is the one that plays almost as a winger, and the right back is the one that actually inverts and comes into a double pivot when they're in possession. That's a big problem.
Greek for you. I got something Greek for you. And the former manager hated him. He likes to go forward.
Yeah, and so right, that works. But we all talk about inverting fullbacks, right? But what is the way that he uses inverted fullback is he uses it as a second holding mid. Do any of us feel comfortable with doing that with Trent? I don't know that we do, right?
I know we don't. I know a lot of people who do, but I know I don't. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So there's some big questions, right? But for me, it's I would go and definitively make a tactical change because I think he has to, but I would do it with the parts that we have because I think there's a lot of value in a lot of these pieces that we're waiting to see what will happen with.
I made the comment a few pods ago. I don't remember if it was here, maybe it was a pre-match show, that I said if I were one player on this side, one aging player whose contract's kind of in the middle, starting to tail down, has ups and downs, peaks and valleys. If I was one guy, I think Paul hits it. I might look at myself if I were Andy Robertson, and I might be a little worried that someone like Edwards might look at me and go, wait, Bayern needs a left back? Bayern Munich needs a left back and might want a guy like Andy Robertson that plays hard and runs up and down the field and gives you everything he has. If Michael Edwards thinks he can turn an $8.5 million purchase, who's given 8 years to the club, into a $40 to $50 million sale, and he can go reinvest that money, and even, who knows, maybe if the reports are true and they're not interested, Real Madrid's not as interested in signing Alphonso Davies, maybe you do some type of swap deal, and now you have an attack-minded left back who plays on the front foot. There's going to be one massive player. I know everyone keeps asking us about Mo in the chat, and we're going to have all summer, I think, to talk about whether we're going to sell Mo. We've done it. But I think if I were saying who's the next player, the big player, the name that might shock people that could get sold, I would put Andy Robertson. I said it yesterday on the award show. There's a bigger chance of Trent playing right back for Real Madrid than there is him starting in the midfield for Arne Slot, in my opinion, at Liverpool. And that's because I actually think he's going to be the starting right back. I don't think Trent's going anywhere. I would probably say Mo is 1, and 1A is probably Robertson as a potential player that could go. Because I think he fits the age profile of when you need to sell. Because one more contract to Robertson, and he has no value. You're selling him literally to Celtic. And I don't think we want that. And I don't think Robertson wants that for his next club either.
No. So, okay, since Spirit asked, let's make a call right here. I'm sure it'll change over. Oh, that's a good shot, actually. Another player that can move. Diaz. We for that, against that. There's a lot of rumors, obviously, about it, but I just feel like that's the only problem I have is we know Edwards, right? Normally, the more we're linked to a guy, the less likely we're going to get it. So I almost don't want to hear about these guys because I feel like it's never going to happen now because it already got out. Diaz, for example, Bickler, there has been a lot of talk about him. Do you think he sticks around, especially if we do something like you're talking about and shifting Nunez left?
He's one that we talked about late last year as somebody that we could see going if the money's right to somebody like PSG. Could definitely see it. It's weird. I feel like the situation is kind of flipped where it really is gonna come down to what the plan is with Mo, because Diaz can play right, you know what I mean? Yeah. But it's that right side of Slot's attacking formation is a like he uses that right wing traditionally as a chance facilitator. So like, is Mo happy with that role? Because if he's happy with that role, that's the best. I mean, I think that's the best thing for Mo, because when Mo was at his best when he was creating chances and not consumed by scoring goals. The question is, can Mo do that, and can Mo be happy with that role? I don't know that he can. And so, you know, and then conversely, the left side of that attack is primarily where the system is designed to draw goals from. And that's where Diaz struggles. He struggles with the finishing in the final third, right? Same for Darwin, right? But like, I think statistically, Darwin, aside from just not being able to fundamentally stay on side, I think Darwin was a little bit unlucky when you look at the fact that he hit the woodwork more than double the next person in the league, right? So like, convert those a couple inches to the left or right, and those are goals. Like, reminds me a little bit of what happened with Suarez when Suarez came in and he was just banging them off the post. And then the next year he came in and just throttled everybody, right? So we could see that. And if that's the case, Darwin is your answer, because he can be your goal scorer on the left side playing off the striker. All comes down. It all is really going to hinge with what are we doing on that right side? What are we doing?
Well, let me ask you this then, because you mentioned about Mo being the facilitator. Would you be happy with that? I mean, obviously it would be in a different system, Paul, but I remember a time where, was it early last season or was it early this season, where we were like, why is Mo constantly on the sideline in the linesman's pockets, where he's as far away from the goal as can be? Was that early last season, maybe?
It was this year.
We could not, was that this year? Like, we could not create, and it felt like, why is he all the way out there wide? Even if, let's say, Mo is happy with that, and I understand it will be a different system than before, can we be successful keeping Mo that far away from the goal and just keeping him as a facilitator?
Well, I don't think he necessarily stays wide in the new formation or the new typically he has that channel go in and play pretty narrow. So, I mean, I don't think we're going to require him to stay wide. It's just going to be like, I think it's going to be a philosophical shift for him. And I don't know how Mo feels about not being the guy that people depend on to score goals. And that's really I think that's really where the question comes in. With Gakpo, I think Gakpo can do well on the left, like Shelton said, but I think Gakpo works more in the 10 here. Like, I mean, this is finally the formation.
Mind-blowing.
Finally the formation where you get a Carvalho or a Gakpo or any player that naturally plays in an attacking mid position can do well. And that's what Gakpo does, because he plays really well with his back to goal. So
would you be playing him in the 10 with Darwin in an ideal formation? You're playing him in the 10 with Darwin coming off the left of a striker. Are you playing that striker being Jota through the center and then Mo on the right? Like, you're just going, You're just going, Arnie's slot ball is our four best attackers on the pitch. No, I honestly like it. I also think it's what makes Diaz and potentially Mo not you can't afford to lose them unless you replace them, but I think it makes it a discussion if right offers come in. And everybody says PSG has to replace Mbappe in the next 72 hours. And anyone who thinks they're not going to is crazy, right? They're going to buy a big player. And I think there's just as much of a chance they come in with a big money offer for Mo as there is that they come in with one for Diaz. They've been linked to Mo in the past. And I think Mo is the perfect type of player, honestly, for that French league. And I think, to your point before, Timuchin, I think Mo can still go to PSG and be the number one goal threat, be the talisman at a Champions League level club. And I'm not going to say he's not our best player, as some people in our chat said earlier, but I will say I don't believe he is our greatest threat to score a goal at this point. And I don't think under Arne Slot, he's going to be the focal of this offense. I think the goal for Arne Slot is to figure out how to make Gakpo and Nunez the focal point, with a player like Jota scoring goals, guys like Carvalho and Szoboszlai creating. And I genuinely think, if you take Mo's penalties away this season, he was bang average and his finishing was really poor. And all of us would argue at times this year we wanted McAllister and Szoboszlai put ahead of him when it came to taking penalties in big spots. I felt more comfortable when McAllister was stepping up to take a penalty than I did when Mo was. So if he's not our number one penalty taker and his underlying numbers are all coming down, including his finishing, I do think it's probably time to question, if he's not your best goal scorer with everything else he does, is he still worth the money that it would take to re-sign? And I think that's where Edwards will come at the end of the day, and why I think if an offer comes, he'll go.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, like Nick says, it seems like the discussion is around the formation, but the philosophy will drive the playing style. I agree to that, but in terms of the issue is still the formation, I think, because it really depends on your personnel and your aggression and how you're going to play is really going to be depending on your personnel out there. I just like the formation that you were given, Bickler. I guess to be able to play something like that, you got to make moves accordingly and have your depth there, because we just threw everybody we have attacking in the starting 11, and we know us in terms of like injuries and stuff like that. So you're not going to be able to keep doing that. I mean, I guess you could throw like Sabostai occasionally in there and stuff like that, but you don't have anybody to replace Jota, for example. Is that an area we will look at in terms of, a striker, a young striker to take that spot, if we don't think Nunez is the guy up in the middle?
I mean, I think that last "if" is the big part, right? And I think there's possibility. Like, I think there's definitely a possibility, but I also think we're not accounting for the fact that, like, if Mo goes, we've seen Diaz can flip right, so there's depth there. And if Mo goes, then there's a player like Bakayoko at PSV that's going to come in and play right-sided and mix in, and that gives you a slew of options. We know Gakpo could go left, right? Yeah. So if you go Gakpo left and you have Darwin left, then really, like, you have the ability to play false nines with the attacking players that we have. You have the ability for Harvey, Carvalho, Soboslai to all rotate in through attacking mid positions. And it is a formation that plays a double pivot. Mac, Endo, Gravenberch, you have depth there. And then all those players, like, essentially, you would have one traditional 6 in there that drops. In possession, it becomes a 4-1-4-1, and McAllister goes forward. So you have him and there's just a lot of fluidity and there's a lot of formational fluidity. And I think there's more depth there than we actually think there is. Like, just in terms of like how.
I also think that, I think we would have saw a lot more of Ben Doak had he not gotten hurt and been able to come back. I think he would have given spells and time on the right. And I think he would have got a lot of run during Mo's AFCON departure and the injuries had he been healthy. And it's just unfortunate for him. Here's a kid who's about to go off to the Euros with Scotland. And if he does himself well at the European Championships, he might be a guy not who's looking to become like an everyday starter, but that might add to some of that depth, and that might change. Like, now you feel more comfortable going and buying a guy like Bakayoko because you have another player in Doak behind him, in Gordon behind him. These are young talents that clubs were very, very interested in when we acquired them. So I understand we don't want to put our eggs in that basket, but I do think, like, Arne Slot is going to play young kids too. This idea that, like, no academy kid is ever going to get a chance. Like, we're hiring Jose Mourinho, and like every academy kid is like literally like, oh no, I can't even make eye contact with the manager. Like, it's not going to be like that. I still think there's going to be opportunities. I just think there's like 2 or 3 major dominoes that need to fall. And I think for guys like Gordon, guys like Dan's even, I think some of these young kids are going to get a lot of minutes early in camp in front of the new gaffer, which is pretty cool because so many players are going to be at the Euros and reporting to preseason late after their holidays. I think the young players have a real chance. Bobby Clark's, Harvey Elliott, I think they have a real chance to show their talents and kind of put themselves in the shop window for the manager before some of the senior players come back. And we've seen that before be a big deal.
Yeah.
The year Harvey Elliott won the starting job because he was the only senior player there all summer long in the preseason.
I mean, but I think the way we're going is defense seems a bit more clear cut, right? I mean, we definitely need a center back, and we're talking about a number 6. That sounds almost like too, I don't want to say basic, but too apparent. And like you're saying, Gally, we've been talking, it's been apparent for a while, but it's still apparent, especially with like Matip leaving and stuff like that for the center back position. So I don't think there's any like questions or doubts or like what ifs and stuff there. The big questions are all midfield and going forwards. and we keep talking about those domino pieces, and obviously we keep circling back and forth, and it just comes back to Mo and what we do with Mo financially, as well as position wise, as well as kind of like going back to what Bickler's saying, his approval or agreement on his new role and stuff like that. So let me ask you guys this: are we, because that's what I'm sensing, so let's go around over here, are we under the agreement almost that if we sold one player this off season, it would be Mo, or we would be okay with him being sold this off season as you rebuild this team going forward in terms of attacking? I mean,
I'm a yes, and
sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
No, go ahead. I was gonna think just
quick.
random name.
I'm a yes, and I was shocked that he got. I remember we were here 3 summers ago, and I was surprised that he got the extension at that time for the money he did at his age. And I always said he would get sold during that contract. The contract almost felt like it was created so he could be sold. He stuck it around last year. And I don't think, my biggest reason for believing he'll be sold is I don't believe Edwards would have gave him the contract 3 years ago. So I sure as hell don't think Edwards is giving him the contract now.
Okay, so before I move to Bickler, let me ask a double follow-up question.
Yep.
If his contract was up in 2 years, would your answer change?
No, I think then you could get more for him to sell him now. Last year was the year to sell him. We got scared right at the last minute because there wasn't enough time to get a replacement, in my opinion. The $200 million offer from Saudi was the offer to accept. They were damn near afraid, and they were feeling good about themselves because they were already 2-0 in the league, and they didn't want to do that at that point, in my opinion. And that's why Mo stayed for this season. And it's going to be interesting now because he's only 1 year away from cashing in and catching all that money for himself. And I hope he has enough clout and responsibility to say, hey, I want that money. They want me, and I want to help Liverpool get some money before I leave. I don't know what's going to happen, but I believe it will end in him being sold. Where? I'm not sure.
How about you, Bickler? Same question to you. Are you selling him, and would your answer change if his contract, if we had him for another 2 years instead of 1?
Yeah, no, I'm with Gally. I think there's a little bit of irony in the fact that I think he wanted to go last summer and we didn't want him to go, and now I think he wants to stay and I think we want him to go. I think that's the reality of it. For me, it makes sense. I think from a timing standpoint, this is a club in transition from a leadership standpoint, and I think he's a piece that makes the most sense. He is the piece that's probably gives you the most value and the most bang, financial bang coming in, and gives you that fluidity, that additional financial fluidity. It makes sense to me. I think the system that Arne Slot brings is not a system that gets the best out of Mo. And I think when you double that with the actual when you put it financially on paper, it doesn't make sense. And if we know anything about Edwards is if there is even a slight probability that he can get value out of it and it doesn't make sense and the team can get by at even a neutral level on it, he'll do it. And that's why I think that I think it's probably already a done deal in the background. I think that the decision has probably already been made, and they're just kind of lining up the pieces in the back. So I know that Mo is kind of propped this up. I know that Mo dropped that little nugget about him coming back and winning trophies and stuff, and that got everybody talking. But I mean, we all know these guys. They're not going to go ahead and tip their hand before the window is done.
Yeah, I mean, because I think Mo probably feels and I almost feel like he is getting the sense that we don't feel the same way. I mean, you can even see in the chat that, with him aging and the system changing and stuff like that in his recent form, we don't feel like he can be the same Mo that he was. And I think in his mind, as most players, aging players are, I think he feels he can. So I don't think he kind of even likes that illusion. So he probably feels he can go to a team and make a huge impact. And I agree with you, Bickler. He's not going to say, God knows where that will be, but I want trophies. He's going to, just say the social media, whatever the social media guy deems appropriate kind of a thing. But yeah, I think it's mainly because of the 1 year contracts for me. I think if it was a 2 year ordeal, I would be like, especially if the money is not an issue. I mean, it would be one thing if I felt like we have to sell to be able to invest. I don't get that sense right now. It's not like the Coutinho deal and stuff like that. So I feel like you don't have to sell him for money, but knowing Edwards and knowing the situation, and this is something that three of us have been bitching about for the last freaking like 4 or 5 years of letting players go for nothing instead of getting something for them, regardless of what it is. Even if it was Keita and you were only going to get 5 million and stuff like that, instead of like just letting them rot on the side, it's a better financial move and it's a better move for the long run. And I agree with what Gally's saying. Yeah, that was the time. Nick says 2 seasons. I don't even know if we had the offers in terms of that money, and the Saudi money was out there.
No, and 2 years ago was
in the volumes it was at least.
2 years ago was when he was the free agent. That was the issue. It would have been 3-4 years ago. And why would you sell a guy then? He was scoring 30 to 40 goals a year. Look, he's been an amazing servant at the club. He scored a ton of goals. He's had huge moments, but we've seen a drop off. He's never been prolific. He's always needed 2 more chances than the next biggest striker to score goals. That's been his way. He's a volume shooter, a volume scorer. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What he's done is amazing. But I said it before, his non-penalty involvement over the last year and a half has really dropped. When you look at him, I can't remember the last time he took on a defender, cut in, and actually got got one on frame, like scored a worldie. Just get one on frame. I think he is one step slower. That doesn't mean he isn't still elite, and it doesn't mean he isn't still a top-level footballer. I would argue this. He wasn't one of the best 5 attackers in the Premier League this season, even though he had the stats. And that, to me, is crazy. And I think that's because there's been an evolution of younger players and people coming on. And I think as we see, there'll be more of these players coming up. And we built this thing on 22 to 30-year-old studs. And I think the fact that we're hanging on to a 32, 33-year-old talking about an extension and building a new system and a new formation around makes no sense. And Mo doesn't appear to me to be a player who wants to be a role player. He was a role player at the beginning of last season, and we were at the best we had been since we won the title. And it upset him so much that when he came back, he was like, bleep this, we're not even trying this. I'm going to try to score every time I touch the ball. And ultimately, Gakpo stopped scoring, Nunez stopped scoring, Nunez went crazy. Like, it all fell apart, let's be honest. The second half of the season really went with our goals going. And I do think a lot of that happened when Mo came back from injury. And part of that is we kind of, to Steve's comment earlier, we learned how to play without him. And we looked like a better team in January and early February until he came back. I don't think we're better without Mo Salah. I think there might be a better version of us without Mo Salah. And it probably means
that's the thing. Oil. It's not like addition by subtraction or anything like that, but I don't think and I don't agree with Brian. I don't think the club needs that revenue. The revenue you get from selling him would be a lot more than the marketing revenue. I mean, if you were after that, you could just go sign accordingly, do what Major League Soccer does, and just get players from according to country instead of skill.
Szoboszlai sold more jerseys last year than Mo Salah did. You know why? He was new, and everyone was excited for new. Sign a young stud right winger who scores a worldie like Sadio Mane in his debut. Those shirt sales will go through the roof, and Nike, Adidas, and nobody will be bitching. We sell.
Yeah, I don't think like the marketing. I don't agree that marketing plays a decision. Correct. I know what Brian is saying in terms of like Mo's stature and stuff like that, but I don't think it plays a decision. And I think here's the thing. Knowing Mo, in some ways, though, Bickler, I feel like it would be a lot more of a happy ending for all sides involved if he went to the Saudi League instead of, for example, PSG. And then, we see him in the Champions League and stuff like that. As far as the fans are concerned, as far as the club is concerned, don't you think it's a happier ending if we were like, and he rode it into the sunset to the Saudis for money kind of a thing?
Yeah, happier for us. I don't know about happier for him, but yeah, I don't know that.
Well, I mean, if you're saying he wanted it last year, it's still semi-happy for him.
Yeah,
semi.
I think it's I think everybody's happy when they get that trundle of money, and then they're not happy when they show up to 700 fans, right? Like, I think I think if you ask anybody that's over there, this feels like China 2.0, where like it's seemed like a good idea at the time. Get over there and you're miserable. So,
would it be different for Mo? You think though, like in terms
because he's
of
Arabic.
cultural differences, yeah.
Yeah, because he's Arabic. I mean, maybe like he would be the face of that league. He'd be the face of that continent, if we're honest, right? I mean, he would be the face of like all of like the Arabian Peninsula. I don't know. I mean, maybe he'd be okay with that. I just think so much of Mo. Like, I think there's a huge ego that has to be satiated a lot that we don't see because he's quiet spoken. Like he seems like a soft-spoken, quiet guy. But I think behind that, there is a big ego that needs to be satiated. And I don't know how much of that is satiated when you're playing at that level without Champions League football, without being at the big stage.
Don't worry about it. The Saudis will be spending some money and they'll be in the Champions League in no time. And
they're going to buy their way.
Playing.
They're going to buy their way into that league. I think we do. Like, I know Nick says, like, in the chat or whatever with PSG. I think all clubs would consider him. It depends on the price. I think we also have to take out the fact that maybe Liverpool says it's time to move on and we'll take 40 million. We'll take 50 million. Well, you know what you do if you make his price tag 40 or 50 million? You make Napoli come into play. You make Juventus come into play. He's proven he can score goals in Italy. That league is slower, even though I think it is the second best league at this point, probably on the continent, if not the best league at times overall. But I think there's still a spot for him in Europe. That doesn't mean he has to play at the top level, and it doesn't mean he has to play in England. I just don't know that if at this age, playing right wing and being the focal point of a top four side makes a lot of sense playing in English football. Because I just think the speed and pace and power of the league just wears down players. And I'll go out and say it. I think Thierry Henry was a better player than Mo Salah overall. And this league ended Thierry Henry's ability to play at this level with this like fierceness and competitiveness. Like, to me,
I think not only that,
I just think it's time.
If you go to a slower league, I think, and if you go to a different league, whether it's the Saudi league or even freaking PSG and stuff like that, and I know we don't use him as much defensively as we do the left wing, for example. He probably does, he's the one that we cheat off of in terms of helping defensively staying up. But you can get more out of Mo. I didn't mean to do that like that, but you can get more out of Mo by playing him defensively. Jesus. Conserving his energy, just doing the attacking part that he likes doing anyway, and playing as a striker. Having said all this, I'm not going to be bummed if they say, hey, Mo's staying. And I'm going to be more intrigued in terms of like what role we'd be using him as, because he has been a great player and there is still some in there. I just don't know, if we're going to be able to get it out with Slot, but we'll find out. That's why this summer is going to be extremely interesting. And I hope pretty soon we'll be able to actually start seeing some pieces come together so that we can make more educated guesses, because I think everything revolves back around to, starting with Mo, what we're going to do formation wise and what some major personnel decisions are going to be. But hopefully by next Monday we'll have more of those news and we'll be able to talk about that. Nick says he'd be great on the New England Revolution. For example, he would kill in MLS, but then again, I might have a shot there too. But you guys have an excellent week. We'll see you guys next Monday. Our next show will be Wednesday morning's coffee show. So we'll see you guys then. As always, thanks for liking, commenting, joining us this Memorial Day. Give us a like, subscribe, grab a friend by the ear, and drag their butt over here to give us a like as well. And we'll see you guys next